Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to AEI. My name is Aparna Mathur, and I'm a resident scholar here in Economic Policy Studies. As many of you may know, I'm also co-director of the AEI Brookings Paid Family and Medical Leave Working Group, along with Isabel Sawhill from Brookings. This also includes not just AEI and Brookings, but scholars from various organizations, as well as experts at universities, many of whom are here in the audience. And we've spent the past 2 to 3 years sort of exploring the issue of paid family and medical leave more in depth, trying to understand not just the benefits, but also the costs of these policies. How do they work for families and workers, but also be designed in a way that they can help employers and not be a huge cost to them. And we also generally looking at the effects on the economy as a whole. We've released a couple of reports, and we're happy to share them with you. But what seems to be happening today is that paid leave is having its moment. In many ways, there are initiatives happening at the state level, at the employer level. We're seeing a ton of discussion around expanding paid leave, especially for the most vulnerable workers, because there's this understanding that they are the ones who are being most left behind by the lack of this policy. And also, it seems in Congress, there's a huge initiative to get moving and to do something that's fiscally responsible, but also provides the benefits that American families need. So today it is my great pleasure and honor to welcome Senator Bill Cassidy to AEI to discuss his perspectives on paid leave. Senator Cassidy has been in the United States Senate since 2014, and he serves on the Senate Finance Committee, the Health Committee, and also the Senate Subcommittee on Fiscal Responsibility and Economic Growth. We're very pleased to have you here, Senator. He is a doctor himself and has committed to crafting a good bipartisan solution on paid leave. I saw you quoted in a news story on that. So a few logistics before I begin. I will be discussing paid leave with the senator for about 15 minutes and then open up to Q&A, where all of you can get an opportunity to chip in and ask your questions. And after that, the senator will adjourn, and we will open up to a panel discussion and a further Q&A. So just to start, Senator, I know it's on everybody's mind. You've talked about coming up forward with a bill. We've seen several other Republican bills come out. Is that something that you're actively considering, and do you think you have Democratic support for it, which also seems to be a big struggle?
We are planning on coming out with a bill. We have, of course, met with the Republican leads on the bills that have been released so far.
Right.
I'm pleased to say that Kirsten Sinema is going to co-lead our bill.
That's awesome.
So it is bipartisan, and I think the first bill, which is bipartisan, and the very same kind of values that I'm bringing to it. How do we help that woman and that man who are struggling to be able to care for their child as someone who's perhaps more affluent appeals to her? I'm pleased to say that we are bipartisan.
That's great. Now, a lot of times when you hear Republicans talking about paid leave, a question we often get is, why are Republicans suddenly jumping onto the issue of paid leave? Why is it something that conservatives and Republicans should care about? So what's your response to that?
Well, a couple things. There's two ways to look at that question. One, the cynic would say that it presumes that Republicans don't care about either women's issues or those who are less fortunate. And I would argue we absolutely do. It's just that we take a different approach. Instead of a government handout, which ends up serving more like flypaper, which traps somebody in dependency because if they earn too much, they lose their benefit, Republicans are more about a trampoline. How do we get somebody out of the unemployment role into the working role? Now, this is totally consistent with this. If you look at some of the rationales for paid family leave, as a physician, I will tell you that we want the mother to bond with the child. If the parent is the caregiver, likewise, but usually the woman. And we also want her to preserve the training that she has had in a business, so she's not forced to leave that business with that training and that opportunity for ascension in ranks, if you will, in order to care for her child. So I think this is an incredibly Republican idea. Again, trampoline, not flypaper, encouraging the family, we are the pro-family party, but also encouraging somebody to reach their economic potential.
Right, and that's something we've always tried to promote, even with the AEI Brookings work, that this is not just a family issue or a women's issue. This is really an economic issue that affects, the country as a whole. It's also interesting, the way we see various proposals being designed, not just on the left, but on the right. The latest is the Social Security idea. We've also seen voluntary tax credits, employer tax credits, like Senator Fisher's proposal. We see proposals for tax-exempt savings accounts to encourage people to save for paid leave. What design makes sense to you? How do you view these different competing ideas? What about a payroll tax? Could you shed some light on that?
I think where we end up in paying for this will, of course, depend upon a consensus among our coalition. Let me first say that. But let me say the prism through which we must look at this. For 25 years, I worked in Louisiana's charity hospital system, and my patients were those who were on Medicaid or who were uninsured, functionally the same. And so they came to a hospital for the working uninsured. And so I'm very comfortable and used to thinking about that person who takes public transportation to her job and who may become an assistant manager, not college educated, and that income level. Now, if you think of that prism, she is probably unlikely to borrow from future Social Security and pay it back because she is struggling to make it happen. She's probably unlikely to do a voluntary credit account because, again, let's assume that she's incredibly frugal, but she's paying her rent, she's paying everything else. We hope she's doing a 529 for her kids' education and maybe a health savings account through her family. This would be a third account, and I think that's a little less likely. We can think about increasing payroll tax, but that is inherently regressive, and we cannibalize the potential to maybe use such a means to bail out the looming bankruptcy of Medicare and Social Security. Now, none of this is a solution. All this is a perspective, and you have to have that perspective of that person. Why do I emphasize the woman such as I used to see in my medical practice? Because if you look statistically, I think I learned this from AEI and Brookings, above about 70K, people have paid family leave even if it's called something else. It is below that level that folks typically don't and have to struggle. And so we need to keep that working family, middle-class family, and less well-off family as our prism, and then look at each of these payment options through how she would perceive it and interact with it.
That's right. And one of the biggest sort of motivations for us to talk about paid leave was the gaps in coverage that you just mentioned. The fact that if you look at the most low-income workers, the most vulnerable workers, they're the least likely to have access to paid leave. And so, one of the discussions we would have within the working group was, do we want to make a policy that's relatively well-targeted towards those workers, or do we want a universal policy that actually applies to everybody but still transfers more of the benefits to the lowest income workers? So how do you see, where do you see the biggest gaps in coverage, and what are the most sort of sensible ways to address those gaps for workers?
You said two things in your intro that I'm going to flip back to. One, you said that we should have a fiscally responsible program. And secondly, you said that many businesses are already doing this. And what we found in our testimony, I head the subcommittee on this issue on finance, so we had testimony come in. Deloitte & Touche was there. And Deloitte & Touche is now offering a benefit to their employees. But if you're in a state such as California, which has now mandated that there is a benefit that goes out to Californians, well, Deloitte & Touche pulls back their contribution. And so this is what formerly Deloitte & Touche paid. Now the taxpayer is putting in, and Deloitte & Touche decreases the amount they're putting forward. Similarly with Google. I'm thinking to myself, you got to be kidding. We got this lower income worker paying more payroll tax to subsidize Google? Oh my gosh, this is a crazy world. So I think what we have found is that above a certain income level, businesses will take care of their employees. It is that lower income, that smaller business, that disproportionately hires lower income workers that struggles to implement this benefit. And we have to be mindful both of the employer and the employee as we fashion this.
Right. At the state level, we're seeing a ton of ways that governors and states are implementing paid leave policies. A lot of them have done it traditionally through payroll taxes, but a few new and interesting ways are developing. So we recently saw Vermont and New Hampshire sort of do an opt-in for employees, where states are pooling workers across the two states to offer them a paid leave program. I mean, what do you think are the biggest learnings from the state paid leave programs? How do you see them informing the design of a federal policy?
Again, I'll go back to what I just said, that when states have begun to offer this, businesses have pulled back that which they are. And since typically it is the more prosperous business which is doing this, I don't think we should have the taxpayer subsidizing that benefit which they are already giving. Just don't. So I think that's the thing which most informs, but I also applaud the states that are doing it because obviously we're learning from them.
That's right. On the Social Security idea, I mean, we are hearing a ton of concern about the fact that we would force people to pull forward money out of retirement. That leaves them economically insecure when they're actually approaching retirement. And the most vulnerable workers are likely to be the most affected by that. How do we fix Social Security? Do you think there's a fix or a way to do that would actually guarantee economic security to them in retirement, but also enable them to have some money, some pay while they take time off?
I raised that concern earlier, but there is a flip side to it. Yeah. One, if you're having a child, you're typically in your 20s, 30s. And so therefore you have a long time before you retire, typically. But secondly, and this is what my assistant Katie Reuters pointed out to me, if because you remain attached to the workforce and you're able to retain the training and the seniority which you have achieved, right, it is possible that your future earnings will be that much more because you were able to take some time off but then return to the workforce. So I think there's actually a dynamic quality to this that we don't quite understand. We know the potential that you would be cannibalizing future earnings, maybe you can't afford to, and the negative. But there's also that potential, no, wait a second, we've set the stage for greater success. So I don't think, and it probably won't be an either or, but I do think that is something that we need AEI and Brookings to study.
And I believe Andrew Biggs is already studying that. Now, Democrats have typically favored an approach that is broader than, I think, the Republican ideas that we're seeing, which have tended to focus on paid parental leave, but not on paid medical and family care leave. Do you see that as a possible area of compromise? Do you see parental leave as a starting point? What are your views on sort of expanding the policy to include all three areas like we do in the Family and Medical Leave Act? Or do you think that parental leave is sort of, where we begin and then maybe at some point expand to medical and family care?
Well, you got to pay for things.
Yeah.
I mean, if ifs and nuts or candies and nuts would all have a Merry Christmas, right? And so I don't want to be cynical, but if you're increasing the payroll tax as their plans do, again, that is regressive. Now, you could say we're only going to do it on upper income people. I suppose you could say that. But the reality is that you're cannibalizing your ability to address the problems of the looming bankruptcy of Medicare and Social Security. Now, we shouldn't make the perfect the enemy of the good. Let's start on the most immediate need, which is to give the parent, typically the woman, the ability to bond with their child, to get all the health benefits for both mama and baby by allowing them to stay together for those 6 weeks after delivery or 8 weeks after delivery. And let's not say, oh my gosh, we can't take care of everything, so let's not do that which is most immediate. I'm for whatever we can pay for and to do that which is most immediate first off, and I think that is paid parental leave and in a way which is fiscally sound.
Great. And one concern with paid leave programs, and you mentioned how businesses might react to these policies. One is the crowd out issue that you mentioned. But the obvious sort of cost to employers of having a paid leave policy, are, and the implications of that on workers. Would they discriminate against workers if they're facing a higher cost of providing paid leave? What do you see the biggest concerns for businesses? How would you design a policy that would actually offset some of those costs? Because even with I think, with any proposal that lets you pay take paid time off, I think the likelihood is that people will take that extra time off, and there will be a cost on businesses. So how do we sort of balance that, the cost and the benefit for businesses and workers?
So there's several aspects to that. I'm trying to raise my right arm, thinking, no, I don't want to do that. There's several aspects of that. Congresswoman Claudia Tenney, in the hearing last time, spoke of having grown up, if you will, in a 5-person small business. If 3 workers had taken time off, how would the business have functioned? Totally get that. But flip it. Wait a second. I've just lost 3 workers who I have to retrain the 3 workers in order to get them up to snuff to where I need to be. So the continued attachment is the flip side of the potential loss.
Right.
I also think that putting a mandate upon business to provide this may work for, again, a Google or a Deloitte. But is it going to work for the bike shop, which is barely making margins and has 3 employees, or maybe 10 employees because they have 2 bike shops? That may be a little bit tougher. So I do think that just as we take, if we're going to speak of the beneficiary, we have to take the person, typically a woman, typically $70,000 or less in income, and take her perspective. Similarly, if we're going to do this in a way which is positive for the economy, we have to take that small employer and think about what she or he is doing to provide this benefit. And we have to think that through. And there is a flip. So if you levy a tax upon a small business, can they afford to even be a small business? And I think that's a consideration. But if you can do it somehow through the tax code, then that would be the better, I think, for that business.
Great. And my final question before we turn to the audience. We're in an economy where workers are much more, it's sort of a gig economy, the whole idea that people are much more mobile across jobs. They're doing part-time jobs here, also taking up, other gig work. How does paid leave how do we do paid leave in that kind of economy? Do we need portability? How do we ensure that any new system that we come up with will actually allow that portability of benefits across, not just, it's not tied to the work, but is actually tied to the worker?
Well, so isn't that interesting? I think the paradigm to which you refer would be as if there is a Deloitte. But the other proposals that are out there, borrowing against future Social Security benefits, or being able to pay into a voluntary account, or the tax credit, or fill in the blank, would presuppose that the patient, that the beneficiary, for 30 years I'm a doctor, and so now I got to think differently, that the beneficiary of this would be able to access it even if she was moving between jobs. And I do think that's one of the, if you focus upon that person, typically a woman, $70,000 or less, what are her economic circumstances, then if it is something that she's drawing down from an account, not from her employer, that does give her the latitude to have 2 part-time jobs but still pull a benefit.
Great, thank you. We're going to turn to the audience. We have about 10 minutes, so yes, great. Please introduce yourself before you ask a question.
Hi. Oh, yeah, there we go. Thanks so much for being here, Senator Cassidy. My name is Jane Addams from Bread for the World. Yesterday was Gender Pay Gap Day, and Vox published data that shows that the gender pay is so much more significant for women who have children. Pay gap is so much more significant for women who have children compared to women who have not had children. As a doctor, you know how important it is for men to bond and be a part of the pregnancy from early on until throughout the child's life, to be participatory in that. How important is it to you that men are also receiving this paid family leave? We've seen in places where it's very incentivized, like Iceland, for men to also take that leave, use it or lose it, that it shows that that gender pay gap is decreasing, but also that men are engaging in the well-being of their child's life in those really pivotal years. So I just want to kind of hear your take on that and how you're thinking about that as you're approaching and really looking for bipartisan solutions. Thank you.
So a couple things that we do know: in certain circumstances, the man would be the principal caregiver for whatever reason for the child. And so in our thinking, that the dad would have this equal number of weeks off as the mom. Now, that said, clearly women are going to be more important to the early child, if only because men can't breastfeed, right? And women can. Let's just acknowledge that. So typically this is going to be a benefit which the mother-child relationship is that which is most profound. And I say that as a dad and a grandfather. But my wife's influence upon my children when they were up to 8 weeks old was greater than mine. It's just the way it works. She fed them, I did not. So, but we have to acknowledge that in a country of 310 million people, that sometimes circumstances differ, and we would want to accommodate different circumstances in a policy such as we are advocating. So.
Next question, Vicky.
Hi, Vicky Shabo, and it was great to testify before your committee last summer. Really appreciated the debate there and the continuing conversation and your interest. And it's really exciting to see more players on both sides of the aisle coming to the table. My question is back to Aparna's about kind of how to reflect the fact that, yes, parents and children have urgent needs, but there's an urgent need for caregiving in this country and an urgent need for workers who are working longer with less retirement savings to also be able to stay in the workforce. And so I appreciated your comment about, the dynamism between keeping moms and new parents attached to the workforce and what that means over their time, over their life of work. I've always been really struck by the data about older workers cycling out of the workforce to have to care for their aging parents. And I know you're familiar with that circumstance personally, and the hundreds of thousands of dollars that they lose in income and retirement savings. And so I'm curious, I guess, to hear a little bit from you about what the inputs will be as you work through this process in a bipartisan way, and what the opportunities will be to have the data from the states come in. Obviously, the states that are seriously considering this and have passed this have done this in a comprehensive way. I would expect that to continue. So what the data is that you will be considering and what the process will look like for your working group with Senator Sinema and through the committee process to get the data from the states, the data from small businesses, the experiences of workers, to test this notion of crowd out, which I haven't seen any data from California or other places that
Deloitte said that in our testimony. Deloitte said that they pull back when there is a state program. You see where I'm going with that?
Yeah, I do. But I'm really struck by how few large employers are providing Deloitte-level benefits, and certainly providing Deloitte-level benefits at all levels of their workforce. And so I'm just really interested in the process that you're planning to have and that your colleagues, Senator Grassley and Leader McConnell, and Leader Schumer are planning to have to really get all of that data in front of the Senate in a real robust way so that you all can craft strong policies that reflect the country's needs.
Yeah, we're
now and
planning.
in the future.
I don't mean to put my hand up. It just got your wife. You have an aura behind you.
The halo.
We are having subcommittee hearings upon this. As I think you know, Ivanka Trump is incredibly interested in this, which I presume means that her father is too. And it's always nice to have the president interested and engaged on such an important issue. So we'll have those hearings and we will review the data. I mentioned Katie Rudis earlier. She is my staffer and she is in the audience. Get her card, call her anytime, day or night. We are actively looking at all the data that is out there, trying to comprehend it.
Hi, my name is Betsy. I'm here representing the Independent Women's Forum. This question is for the Senator. Senator, at the subcommittee hearing on parental leave last summer, you suggested that it would be irresponsible to increase payroll taxes now to fund a new parental leave entitlement, given the likelihood that we will need to increase payroll taxes to address Social Security insolvency. In other words, we should not be creating new obligations when we already have problems funding our existing obligations. More recently, you've stated that you've identified certain programs that can be cut and propose using that savings to create a new parental leave entitlement. Given your previously stated views, wouldn't it be more responsible to apply these savings to address Social Security's insolvency issues?
So I don't know if I said programs that would be cut. I think programs that would be reformed. And I think there is a difference between those two terms. In my mind, there is, of course. If if we're speaking about traditional Social Security, the benefit for the old age, if you will, I get closer and closer to Social Security. I less and less like to refer to it as the old age benefit. But that said, that is a massive problem. This is a little bitty problem. And it may be, as we spoke earlier, allowing someone to stay attached to the workforce will actually increase the amount of Social Security benefits that she or he pays. It may also increase the productivity of a business, which does not have to continually retrain somebody. So your question presupposes that we will have less long-term revenue. I think short-term we absolutely will. And we have to figure out how to pay for this over the 10-year window. Over the 70-year window, I'm not quite sure. It's going to be the 25-year-old woman who remains attached to the workforce, who then maybe when she's 55 is earning that much more on a compounded basis, et cetera, et cetera. So until we know that, we know 10-year, we got to pay for it. 70-year, it may pay for itself. I don't think it's going to pay more than itself, but I do think there's a chance for it to be budget neutral, and I'm willing to explore that.
You have a question there?
Hi, my name is Bianca. I'm a reporter for Newsy. Senator Gillibrand has been really critical of the Republican push to allow Americans to use Social Security funds in order to fund paid leave, and she calls it a false choice. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that. Do you see it as a false choice too?
When someone is running for president on the Democratic ticket, anything Republicans propose, including turning the air conditioner on a hot day, will be considered a false choice. So I like Kirsten, but I'm not totally intimidated. Oh my gosh, she doesn't like our proposal. But how do you pay for it? I would argue that her proposal to increase payroll taxes dramatically is a false choice. Oh, we're going to improve somebody's economic outcome by taxing them more? Well, that's a really crazy idea in my mind. A tax which is typically regressive. Oh no, we're just going to raise it on the upper income, as if that doesn't trickle through the economy. If we want to start speaking of false choices, I would argue that regressive taxes are false choices. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
We have time for one last question. Yes.
Thank you. Hi, Zach Cohen from National Journal. So it sounded like you were cynical earlier about the idea of, especially lower income workers, deferring their retirement in order to get a paid family leave or participate in that kind of program. And as you said, a payroll tax isn't the answer either. How do you then pay for a federal program that would essentially provide this paid family leave?
Well, one thing, I don't know if I was cynical about it. I'm certainly open to considering it. And I gather that the research is being done. Again, in the 10-year window, you'd probably have to pay for it, but preserving attachment to the workforce, allowing people to keep their accumulated training and experience and to seamlessly go back to the job they previously have had, does that long-term give you greater savings? I think that needs to be explored as we look for a way forward in this. But on the other hand, before I speak specifically to how we would pay for it, I want to get a consensus with my collaborators. You're a reporter. Whatever I say will then become my position. Even if I'm only speaking academically, these are the considerations. So I'd rather keep the powder dry as I work with Senator Sinema and my other colleagues to where we get to a consensus on this. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Senator. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but thank you. Please join me in thanking him for his excellent comments. Thank you so much. Thank you. Great. I think we're ready to begin our panel. So welcome back. We've already heard from Senator Cassidy about the fact that he might be proposing a bill, and he has a Democratic co-sponsor. I just wanted to go around the panel. Let me introduce our panelists first. So to my right, I have Harry Holzer. Harry Holzer is the John Lafarge S.J. Professor of Public Policy at Georgetown University and an Institute Fellow at the American Institutes for Research. He is also a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. To his right, University School of Social Work and co-director of the Columbia Population Research Center. She is also a visiting professor at the London School of Economics. Then we have Douglas Holtz-Eakin. Douglas is the president of the American Action Forum. During 2001 to 2002, he was the chief economist of the President's Council of Economic Advisors, where he had also served during 1989 to 90 as a senior staff economist. And then finally, we have Belle Sawhill, who's also the co-director of the AEI Brookings Project on Paid Leave, is a senior fellow in economic studies at the Brookings Institution. She served as vice president and director of the Economic Studies program from 2003 to 2006, and she's also a co-director with Ron Haskins of the Center on Children and Families. So just before I get into my questions, I just wanted to get your thoughts on the senator's talk and his ideas on how he might do paid leave. Harry, do you want to start?
Sure, thank you. Very happy to be here and talking about this important issue. A lot of what I heard from the senator was very encouraging, starting with the fact that he intends to write a bipartisan bill with Senator Sinema, which made me feel better. I could ignore all the snide comments about Democrats prefer flypaper as opposed to trampolines, and that which doesn't enhance the bipartisan spirit, frankly. But he has a bipartisan setup. He correctly identifies the many benefits that would come from providing paid leave and benefits for labor force participation, steadier labor force participation, particularly for young women. He recognizes that the real gaps are at kind of the middle to lower end of the income spectrum. I think all that is positive. A lot of the details were clearly left out because they haven't negotiated. It sounded like he was thinking of parental only. Many of us prefer something broader. It sounds like he was thinking only of, at one point he said 6 weeks, although that's probably not locked in. That's on the very low end. I guess on the pay-for side, that's where it was hard to hear anything. The senator's rejection of payroll tax I found very unconvincing. First, he keeps saying over and over again it's regressive. Well, it doesn't have to be regressive, depending, because we don't have to cap it at a certain level of income. Right now, we cap Social Security, but not Medicare taxes, for instance. Mm-hmm. So if you don't cap it, it's proportional. And if the tax is proportional, and if the benefits are very progressive, on net, then the system is progressive, in my view. So that sounds like a false characterization. When he discussed I share his skepticism about the Social Security dig-in. If people are already nervous about how they can afford retirement, and this will make them even more nervous and more reluctant to take up the benefit. So I share that. He talked about maybe reforming programs and taking money out of those, but without any details. Mm-hmm. And so I think I'm left, my impression of the financing piece is the following. The adamant rejection of the payroll tax, I think, makes it hard to come for some kind of compromise on the pay-for side. And this is my fear, and others may think this fear is not founded. When I look at current Republican senators and congressmen, nearly 90% have signed the no tax pledge to never, ever, ever raise taxes under any circumstance, which to me is fiscal lunacy. And for many broader issues besides paid leave. But to me, they're locked in by that pledge. So it's not an honest consideration of what's really the best pay-for mechanism. And as long as, and I don't know anyone who's ever broken that pledge once they've signed it. So to me, once you've signed it, you're locked in, and people look for reasons to oppose and to reject a payroll tax. So again, let's hear more about the other mechanisms. Let's hear these two senators and their colleagues see if there are other ways of reaching compromise. But that to me is the biggest sticking point, and of all I heard, the part that I was least attracted to.
Great. Jane?
Well, I think I agree with just about everything that Harry just said. So let me see what I can say that would add to that, because I don't want to just repeat what he said. I guess the additional concerns I would have would be one, we currently have a two-tier system. So the system we have is that the more advantaged half of the labor force has paid leave, some form of paid leave at work for family and medical leave needs, and the bottom half of the labor force doesn't. And so we already have this two-tier system. That's the issue with the FMLA, is that the leave is unpaid. And so if you're lucky and you work for an employer who provides paid leave, you can take advantage of it. If you're unlucky and you're lower income or minority, you're not offered paid leave. You're not able to take advantage of unpaid leave. Or if you do have to take leave, then you end up going on welfare, borrowing money, going into debt, facing hardship. So I think it's really disappointing that this proposal just reinforces that kind of two-tier system and says, well, we'll leave the status quo. If you're advantaged, you'll get great benefits at your employer. If you're disadvantaged below 70K, lower middle income, you'll get benefits through this as yet to be defined new program. I thought it was really ironic that the senator opened with the idea of, we hate means-tested programs. They stick people. They mean if you earn $1 more, you don't get the benefit. And then he kept emphasizing the 70K cutoff. So you're a worker, your boss offers you a promotion, you're going to go from 69K to 74K, you turn it down because you're not going to be able to be in this program anymore. So this is exactly the benefit trap, the poverty, the trap that he was started with his remarks about. So I thought that was just so ironic. I also wanted to pick up on the point that Vicki raised about crowd out. I'm studying employer responses to these state laws across a number of states. I've never yet seen evidence of employer crowd out. So this is the issue of like an anecdote versus empirical evidence. So they have one employer who says, we cut back on our extremely generous benefits in states that pass these laws. That's Deloitte. And then we've done, representative surveys of thousands of employers in states that have implemented these laws, and we haven't seen any evidence yet of employer crowd out. So I do intend to provide some evidence to the subcommittee on that point because we haven't seen it. And then I guess the third point, just to stress, is the issue of comprehensiveness. I thought the senator did a really good job of talking about what the costs are of not having paid parental leave, the costs in terms of infant and maternal health, but also the cost to employers of losing valued employees and having to replace them. Well, that happens in other situations. So we don't know as much about the needs of people who have a child with a serious health condition or a disability, or people whose partners or spouses have a health condition, or whose parents have a serious illness. But what we do know from a long tradition of studies in labor economics is that people tend to leave their jobs. That's how they tend to manage having somebody with a disability or having an elder care responsibility. So, you get to older workers in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, and you're starting to get, like 25% of them either have a health condition themselves or a partner with a health condition or a parent with a serious health condition. These are people who are quitting their jobs, retiring from the labor force, so they're not contributing to Social Security anymore. They're claiming prematurely. This is a huge hit for all of us in terms of financing Social Security. So it's really the same logic that the senator was applying at the paid parental leave end, but it's for all of these other conditions as well. So it is another point that I'd like to provide some evidence on because we've been studying this as well.
Okay, Doug.
So I think most of the major issues have been surfaced. I just want to first applaud those who are sort of filling out our knowledge about the programs, the reactions of employers and individuals to those programs. I think there's been sort of too much policy proposal by anecdote and too little evidence, and hopefully fixing that is the first order of business. I'm a little more sympathetic to concern over raising payroll taxes than Harry is. I mean, my view is that if you look at the Social Security and Medicare programs, they have essentially already promised to raise payroll taxes a lot, and so raising them for this purpose is either stealing from those raises or adding on top of something that's going to happen anyway, and that becomes a significant issue in my mind. I do know that the alternative is not to say that this will be such a good thing that it will pay for itself and be free, which he seemed to suggest. Put that out of your minds right now and forever. If we're going to do this, we should figure out what it costs, what the genuine benefits are to the parents and children, and go from there. So I think those are important issues. I'm in favor of a more targeted program in general at the outset. I'm nervous about launching into a very broad parental, family, medical leave, universal payroll tax financed. So everything he said about targeting programs on parents, on those who have clearly less access to paid leave from their employers, the lower paid workers, things like that, I think is the right first step. I think that is the thing to do. It comes with trade-offs. There's no question about that. We face benefits out. Those are implicit taxes. We should acknowledge that and try to design it sensibly. But those things that I found refreshing. And, a senator not being totally forthcoming about a proposal that doesn't yet exist, not really news.
That's fair. Yeah. It did sound like he was open to, he was trying to stay open to ideas, which is interesting.
Yes, it's the famous anything to get to 60
approach.
Yeah.
It's politics. Belle?
Well, it's hard to know what to add to this set of comments. I agreed with so many of them. But it seems like where we are is we have three big issues here that have come out in the process of this discussion. One is, what is the pay for? Yeah. The second is, do we want to go just with parental leave or do we want a comprehensive bundled approach? And the third is, how does this relate to Social Security and all of its problems? So let me touch on those at least. I would say that I was very, very encouraged by the fact that they are now talking about a possible bipartisan effort in the Senate. Okay. That is huge, and I wouldn't want to do anything to discourage that. And I hope that we can keep the conversation, very open. And I think, Vicki, your thoughts that, we need to do this thoughtfully and with data and with research, I really appreciated that. And as Aparna, you said earlier, our group that's working on this, the AEI Brookings group, is going to be doing exactly that over the next year or so. And we will hope to continue to be part of the conversation along with many of the rest of you in this room who work in this area. But going back to the sort of pay-for issue, which I think is just huge, and has always been huge. I mean, we ran into it in our earlier work. Right. You have one group of people who is saying, let's pay for this now, and let's do it in a collective manner through social insurance, so everybody is contributing. And you have another group that's saying, let's pay for it later. And let's pay for it at an individual level, so it's the individual that bears the burden of eventually taking less benefits from Social Security, for example, to pay for the fact that they're using some benefits early. So those are really two very different approaches. And I've been trying to think, well, is there any way to kind of negotiate through all of that to find a compromise? And I don't have any magic answers, obviously, but it does occur to me, first of all, the cost of paid leave is not at all high. I think one of the contributions that our group made in the last phase of our work, and it's in our last report for those of you who are interested, is we did a really credible job, I think, using the research from 3 different organizations, including Doug's and some others, to look at costs, and we found that they are not very high. The highest cost part of this is medical leave for your own illness or injury. Parental leave is second, but it's really quite small, and caregiving leave is like rounding error, at least right now. So that's point one. I could almost echo the senator saying this is rounding error, It's a rounding error on Social Security as a whole. It's also a rounding error, by the way, on the 2017 tax cut, which I'll come back to. So here's a second point that I think is good news. I don't hear anyone who isn't talking about fiscal responsibility, whether on the right or on the left. At least that's part of this mainstream conversation. So that's good news. I mean, as Doug just said, and I agree, I don't think anybody believes that paid leave is going to pay for itself. Yeah. And that we could do some dynamic scoring here that will say, oh, there's no cost, don't worry about it. And on the left, I don't think anybody believes in modern monetary theory that says, oh, just increase the deficit and don't worry about anything unless inflation should break out again. So we are all talking about how do we pay for this, and that's a positive point. I think that we have emphasized in our own group that benefits should be earned. And that's why we like an employee payroll tax, or many of us do, and that's why many states use an employee payroll tax. Some use a combination of employee and employer, but the most common financing mechanism at the state level right now is to tax all employees a small amount as a type of forced saving, in my view, that's then set aside so that when you need it for paid leave, it's there for you. Now, of course, there's some cross-subsidization from those, for example, who have more children versus those who have fewer, or those who have big health events and those who have few, et cetera. But that's the nature of social insurance. In my own recent book, I called for actually making this part of the Social Security system, and my argument is it's time to update Social Security for all of the demographic changes that have taken in recent decades. And we all know what they are. Much higher labor force participation of women, creating all of this work-family balance issue, an aging population, more single parents, and for all of those reasons and others, we really need to modify Social Security, which, you know, the population just doesn't look like it did in the 1930s. Now, in the process of fixing it, we need to make it solvent for the long run. We need to either reduce the growth of benefits or raise taxes, and I think some of both. And, you know, we are going to need later retirement, in my view, because we're all living longer and living healthier, and we're working longer and can work longer. And that will free up some resources, which could be used not only to make the system solvent, but to add a few sweeteners. I mean, I'm sitting here thinking politically, we're going to have to tackle Social Security. Maybe we can't do it real soon. I understand it's a political Pandora's box, but we're going to have to fix it. And I think if we sweeten the needed changes that are going to be painful with some new benefits that are more up to date, including this one, which doesn't cost very much, that could help. So I was going to say something, but I probably should stop right now. On this comprehensive issue, I do want to come back to that.
Can I pick up on that in just two ways? Sort of one, this notion of sort of rethinking the Social Security benefit in general is absolutely right. I mean, and the notion that somehow this system doesn't fit the modern population is dead on, and the sort of putting off coming to grips with that has been quite troubling for me, at least. And so the second thing about that is, one of my deep concerns with the existing entitlements is that they are essentially all targeted toward old age. And in my view, if we were starting from scratch, the entitlements would be targeted to the kids. And we would pay more attention to early childhood education, and we'd pay attention to leave. We'd pay attention to everything that would get people educated into the labor force in a way that would allow them to take care of themselves in old age.
Hear, hear.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, yeah.
So the more we preserve the old one, the harder it is to get to the new one. And I worry about people who are unwilling to touch existing entitlements for that reason. It's just, you can't do everything. You're going to have to figure out how to do this. The second thing is on the cost. And I'm not going to get this right. I'm just going to point out that my colleague Ben Giddis took the Family Act and sort of estimated its cost using the behaviors under the FMLA, which of course is an unpaid leave setup. And then the Cato Institute did a survey of people and asked them how they would behave if they had options for paid leave and re-estimated it, and it's way more expensive. Now, the question is, do you believe what people say or what they do? I don't believe either sometimes, but
it's probably somewhere in the middle.
I would be a little cautious about the cost of this. I'm just not sure what it'll be, and that's on the website. Has all the numbers. My brain's not big enough. I've forgotten them.
That's great.
Can I say something more about the comprehensive issue? I mean, I think that we have had this debate about whether we should bundle all three types of leave or whether we should just go for parental for now. There seems to be more support for parental leave. I'm a little uncomfortable about unbundling. And I think I share the concern of those who don't want to bundle, that caregiving and medical leave seem more open-ended and likely to be potentially abused, likely to become very expensive if we aren't careful. I think the way to handle that is just to put very strict limits on that type of leave, and also to see how it works and not think that you can do it perfectly the first time through. Maybe we even need a demonstration program in that area. But I don't like the idea of giving up on bundling all three types of leave together. And allowing people, one of the reasons we need to do that is because politically, you're reaching a much broader constituency if you treat all three. And maybe because of my age, I am looking at the aging of the population and the needs there, and they are huge. And that doesn't mean somebody should get to take off time from work to spend 6 months holding the hand of their elderly parent, but a little time off to help with navigating the system would be very helpful.
And we do actually have evidence from demonstration programs because we have the states that have passed and implemented these policies. So we've got California, Rhode Island, New Jersey, now New York, now Washington State, soon Massachusetts as well. So we do have evidence on how these programs have worked. And as you were saying, the biggest event that people use this kind of leave for is their own illness. Because everybody gets ill and has serious illness, whether it's the flu or an injury like the senator had. You end up having to take some time off. The second biggest event, but it pales by comparison, is parental leave. There are very few such leaves because most people only have 1 or 2 kids, or maybe some people have 3. Not so much anymore.
Well, furthermore...
and then the rarest is the family care leave. So we actually do know how people believe when paid leave is offered. It's been offered in some big states, big enough that we can study. None of the programs have gone bankrupt. They're not very costly. So I would believe the evidence from the states about what people actually do when there is paid leave available rather than what people say in a survey, conjecturing if there were paid leave, what might you do?
Okay, let me get back to the state question in a minute. It does seem like there are two sort of big competing ideas now. On the left is the Family Act, on the right is Social Security, pulling forward benefits. Are they really that different? I mean, when you think about it, both are based in Social Security. One is more expansive. It includes parental, medical, and family care. The other is starting off with parental, but potentially maybe at some point, people will start thinking about medical and family care. Do you think, and as Bill and Doug pointed out, at some point you will fix Social Security, and that could be through a higher tax.
Oh, you're such an optimist.
Yeah.
Well, but we are going to fix it before 70 years from now, as the senator.
But the question is, is adding on parental really, breaking the back of Social Security any more than it's already broken? And so if we're thinking about fixing Social Security, I'm just trying to get at, are there more similarities than people give them credit for? Are there more common areas and possible areas of compromise on the left and the right, given that they're both sort of starting off? One sounds like a minor or a smaller version of the Family Act, maybe, with a different funding source.
I think on the benefits side, there's room for compromise. 6 or 8 versus 12. Complete bundling or just, those things, I think you can split some differences, and that I don't think is where the sticking point. And just a couple of points on that. Some of the states have TDI, have temporary disability insurance, that covers the medical part. So in those states, it is less expensive, and the tax rate can be smaller. I've been very open to thinking about a version of federal TDI as part of some reforms of disability insurance. And this is where I sometimes agree with my Republican friends that some reforms are really needed in that system, and building TDI as part of that reform process, I'd be sympathetic to. But I think on the benefit, and I'm much more skeptical that politically we're anywhere close to this a big Social Security. So I'm against putting this in that framework, because then I think just nothing will happen. We desperately need to fix that problem. I just see the two sides as being so far apart. And it gets back to the place where it's hardest to compromise is on the pay for. Yeah. And that's where the gulf is very wide. And again, if our Republicans have really locked themselves into no tax at all, that's hard to compromise with. And so that's what I worry about most on the sticking side. And by the way, one other point, I worry more than a lot of progressives do about the cost of this to employer. The cost is not the tax part, which mostly will be paid for employees anyway. The real cost is the disruption to the business. And there's starting to be, we have clear evidence of the benefits in terms of labor force participation, the benefits to kids. We're starting to get a growing body of evidence on the costs to employers. At least they perceive costs, and they respond by cutting back their willingness to hire less educated younger women. And it's disturbing. But that body of evidence is growing. And so somehow, to me, that means even on the benefits side, the need to compromise is very great. And so I would be happy to walk away from some of the generosity of the Family Act because of that employer response. But the pay-for side, I'm still at a loss to see how we bridge those gaps.
Just to round out the picture on employers, in our surveys of employers, we're asking them about, have you had employees take this type of leave? How did you manage it? Was it difficult? I think it's 10% or fewer of employers who've had employees take this kind of leave say that it was difficult to manage. So yes, it's difficult to manage in some situations. 10% or less of employers say it's difficult.
But the data show, those states show a cutback.
But Harry, let me finish. So that's one data point from employers. How do they handle the work when their employees are out on leave? 90% of them assign the work to other employees. So it's very rare to hire replacement workers. And when we ask employers in the states that have these laws, what's your view on the laws? Are you very supportive, somewhat supportive, neutral, somewhat opposed, very opposed? 2/3 of them in all the states we've surveyed are somewhat or very supportive, and another 10 or 20% are neutral. So you can do the math. There's only a small share who are opposed. So that's just another set of data points around employers.
But Jane, on the question of, do you see a possible compromise between the left and the right, like the Family Act and the Social Security idea?
I see lots of possible compromises, but I'm not in Congress. You know what I mean? So I naively,
I get that.
If the worry is that if you use payroll taxes now, whether imposed on employers or employees or some combination, you're getting in the way of your ability to use payroll taxes in the future for a Social Security reform. Well, you could still use payroll taxes now, and someday in the magical future, when there's some grand compromise on Social Security, there's a major overhaul, then you shift that, and you shift it into... I love Bell's idea of modernizing Social Security, making it cover a broader range of needs for today's population and today's workforce. So in the future, you start now with payroll taxes on employers or employees, and then in the future you shift it to Social Security. That would make perfect sense to me.
Yeah,
but I'm not in Congress. So
let me just elaborate a bit on that, because I get the idea that it's not that if we wait until the entire Social Security system is reformed to do anything on paid leave, we might wait forever.
Oh, yeah.
But I think my point is you frame it in that context. You get people to recognize that it is going to have to happen. Like Doug, I would like to see it happen sooner rather than later. Every expert who's ever looked at it has said it will be much less disruptive and costly if we do it sooner rather than later. Furthermore, if you are a conservative, you should want to do it sooner rather than later, because if we wait till the last minute, politically, the pressure to raise taxes to pay benefits that are almost already owed will be huge. So if I were a conservative, I'd be fighting hard to do this now, and I would be looking for a way to do this now, and I would be tapping into the interest of providing some new benefits to try to do it sooner rather than later. But either way, I would frame it in that larger sense and point out it's very small relative to the bigger problems we have to confront there.
Right.
I have one other idea while I have the floor.
Yeah.
I want to remind people that we, in the 2017 tax law, extended the child tax credit. And not only did we double it, but we moved it up the income scale. You can get it until you have an income of $400,000 a year per couple. And so I'm sitting here thinking, oh my gosh, we can't find a way to pay for a very small amount of money for a parental leave program. I mean, is there some way to say, well, if you're going to have a baby, we let you have your child tax credit sooner, and maybe we boost it, and maybe we say once your income, let's suppose Senator Cassidy is right, and that these people who got the time off are going to have much better earnings trajectories, and once they get to an income of a certain level, maybe they'd have to pay that back or something like that. I mean, I think we should think creatively about that child tax credit.
I actually have a piece of tax.
Oh, sorry. It's a
tax
piece,
notes
just
talking
plastic
about
water.
Yeah, talking about the advance, like letting people take the child tax credit in advance and letting them use, that for paid parental leave.
It's not quite.
There are actually a lot of tax credits that we have that help families with children. So
Right.
potentially you could use some of those too.
Just on the bundling issue, and if there's space for compromise there.
Yeah.
I don't know. Again, I'm not in a legislature, but when I've talked to people at the state level with the states that have passed these laws or are considering these laws, what's getting these laws over the majority line and getting them enacted is not the universal agreement about paid parental leave. I mean, that's, already there. What's getting people on board is this will cover if you've got an elderly relative who falls and breaks her hip, or you've got a child who's diagnosed with cancer, or you've got a partner or spouse who's diagnosed with cancer. These kind of really awful medical events are what grab the attention of legislators. And I was stunned when I heard this, because I would have thought, you'd push the new moms and the new dads and you'd push the beautiful babies. But what's really getting to legislators is they're hearing from constituents who are dealing with these awful medical events and are looking for some help just so that they can take time off and not lose their job for all the reasons that the senator was talking about. So they don't lose their workforce continuity and they don't lose the human capital they've built up in the firm. So I don't know. I think politically it makes sense to bundle these things. So whether there's a compromise that would unbundle and, undo what the FMLA did and undo what all these state laws have done. The FMLA and all the state laws are comprehensive. If anything, the direction of change has been to include more conditions, not fewer. A lot of these laws now include care for a military family member when they're deployed, care needs when somebody's deployed, or care needs when somebody comes home from the military with injuries. So we're going to step back from that and not include that in family leave? I mean, it just boggles my mind that we would step away from that.
But my concern...
I'm not sure that there's a compromise there on comprehensiveness.
My concern is that all of those state data points are very blue states. I have yet to see a really red state. And if we did, and then we maybe have some sense... I mean, my fear, for instance, about the surveys of employers are all from blue states. And my sense is that employers in blue states may see this very differently than employers in red states. But that's we need some data points. I would love to see some state-level plans, and then we'd have a clearer sense of where are the possibilities for compromise and what might be more politically acceptable at the more conservative end of the spectrum.
I'll just note, you two talk past each other on the employer impact. Harry's concern is about who gets hired and not hired. And your evidence is on people who are there. And it doesn't say anything about employers changing the skill mix that they hire and disadvantaging those.
What does it do to new hires? Yeah.
Doug,
I didn't hear from you on the, the possibility of compromise between the Family Act guys and the...
I think we don't know, honestly. I have a lot of sympathy for Harry's point of view that the state level stuff is heavily stacked toward these very blue states. I think there is a real big difference in viewpoints on this between the social insurance model and this sort of notion that this is really just an employee benefit that should be part of the compensation package, and you're either mandating it or in some cases paying for it, and it would be better to have individuals just explicitly pay for it themselves, which is the sort of borrowing into your Social Security. And that has the appeal in some people's eyes of basically offsetting it from another entitlement, which is a core issue that we face. And so I think the bigger the benefit package gets, the harder it is to make the case that you want to sort of go to the Social Security model, and so that they interact in that way. I'm glad people are thinking about it. I don't expect them to get anything through Congress in the foreseeable future on this, but I would love for the process in the Senate to actually deliver a co-sponsored bill to the public that people are willing to stand up and defend. That would actually be, in and of itself, a tremendous accomplishment.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, nothing's going to pass until after 2020 anyway, but I agree with Doug that if we could get a good bill and have it debated, that would be very helpful. I wanted to add to Jane's argument about bundling to say that I think it's really odd that people are giving priority to parental leave over other types of leave, especially medical leave, because a medical event is totally unpredictable. It is the only, social insurance is the only way to really handle it, whereas having a baby should be, at least partially, a planned event. Now, I understand offsetting that people tend to be young when they have children and not have savings. On the other hand, you can get cancer when you're young too, or break your leg or whatever. So the whole idea of giving priority to parental leave over medical leave doesn't make sense to me. The fact that we don't have mandated sick leave in this country, and that there are people who have to go to work when they're sick because they can't afford not to go without a paycheck, and then infect others in the process, I've always thought was just really terrible public policy.
So we've talked a lot about the learnings from the state. Do you want to talk about, how that would influence how you think of a federal policy? What do you think should be done? And you can talk about rethinking social insurance, but thinking about how to deal with paid family medical leave. How would you design a policy if you were actually in Congress? We can let someone else go first. Belle, do you want to go first?
Oh, how would I design a policy? Oh, that's a really simple question. Yeah. I think, as Harry or someone said earlier, we can find compromises on the design, on the duration of the leave, on wage replacement, even on job protection, and many of the, not having it be only for women, making sure that there's outreach, or even maybe leave it. What is it? Lose it or use it or lose it type policy with respect to men and fathers. But I mean, those are things that can be worked out. I'm not worried about those. I think these other issues are the big ones.
I think all I'll say is that every state leave program has gotten more generous. So they've gotten successively more generous. So. And more progressive in design. So there have been concerns about the initial programs not being affordable for lower income families. So now the wage replacement rates tend to be higher. The durations are tending to be longer. The definition of family tends to be getting broader because there's some family members who are not covered. The states are moving in the direction of greater generosity and more comprehensiveness, and still with very, very low payroll tax contributions. And they're learning a lot more about outreach and about how to administer these things. It's great fun to talk with the state administrators because it's a couple of people in each. These are small programs. These are tiny. It's a few administrators in each state who are administering. So you talk with them, and for them it's all about the programming and the systems that write the checks. And this is what they do. They administer these programs. It's not rocket science, and it's affordable, and they're working well. So that's one of the greatest lessons from the states. And as I said, talking with employers has been a revelation, because we're specifically targeting small employers, so we really wanted to go after places where this would be difficult. Our first study, we only talked to employers in fast food and manufacturing. So we completely stacked the deck in terms of places that are fast-paced, where it would be really hard to have workers be out. We couldn't even get these line managers on the phone. These places are so fast-paced. It was a nightmare to try to get them to take the survey. We finally went to a survey firm, and they've done a much better job than we did when we were making the phone calls. But they're just, it's not difficult for them. It's a no-brainer. And what they say is, as the senator said this morning, these employees are going out anyway. So the question is, are the employees getting some pay while they're out, which is a great relief to the employers, and are they going to come back, which again is a great relief for the employers. They've been very positive, and we don't rely on their self-report in terms of if they think there's been a hit on productivity or attendance or whatever. We look at what they rated before the law and what they rated after the law, compared to similar states before the law and after the law. So it's, sort of difference in difference framework. And thus far, we haven't seen any negative impacts.
Well, again, I'm going to really disagree with that strongly, because the evidence on hiring, actual
So
hiring...
this is from
Can I
one
finish?
paper.
No, I need
This
to
is
finish
from
now.
one paper that you circulated that I haven't had a chance to read
and if you
yet.
read that paper, there's several others that are cited, several others cited on unemployment rates and other variables that show the same thing. And these are from the least generous states, Jane. So I don't think we can dismiss, the fact that these bluer states. So if the evidence of these costs, not just in one paper, from the starting the least generous states, let's see what happens in these states that become so much more generous, and let's see what happens, what the responses are in a broader. I would not rely that heavily on the set of very blue states for creating federal policy. I just don't think it's the right basis. I think we need to look for something where that trade-off is taken more seriously, I guess. And I do like the idea of trying to deal with own illness through TDI. So that's when I'm willing to open a little bit to see if there's any movement on building TDI into a policy where I also have some reforms in SSDI, at least that piece, because I think the states that started early, that had somewhat less expensive, more moderate programs, are the ones that had a TDI. And maybe there we could have a sort of more of a compromise about reform combined with, but I wouldn't look to those bluest states for the model. I would go for something a little more moderate, and to see if we can get some buy-in from both sides.
Yeah, we need much more research and survey, I guess.
So let me say three things, two sort of fairly targeted ones, and one on sort of the notion of thinking about the states as evidence. First, I want to agree with Harry on looking at SSDI and reforming the DI program. Every time he says something that I want to do, I agree with him. We are long overdue for rethinking the DI program. And it was my hope, vain as it turned out, that the impending shortfalls in the financing of DI would drive actual reforms in DI a few years ago. That would be good practice to do actual retirement in Social Security. None of that happened. But if you want to think through a temporary disability insurance program as part of the sort of DI program, I think that should be on the table. That's something that's long overdue. Second thing I'll just say is I understand that one. I understand the parental one. The thing I'm concerned about really is the family leave piece.
Caregiving?
Yeah, the caregiving. Because, we know what the outer limit of that looks like. That looks like the Class Act and the fact that you have an unfinanceable long-term care insurance problem in the U.S. That's a big problem. So, and we're not going to be able to do that through this. So I'm afraid we will create a caregiving benefit that actually doesn't solve anything. Doesn't satisfy anybody, and that's just a concern I have. So that's that. Now the states are not the federal policy, and so you can't just translate directly. States are self-selected businesses who chose to stay there, go there, despite the economic environment. So you can't just take at face value what happens. Program startup is different than program running over a long period of time. In those states, the employer committee has tied together the costs and benefits and bought in. Once you put the thing in place, employers are going to look at the cost. They might not tie the benefits to it, and they're going to say, screw it, I'm not going to hire these people. I think you have to be very skeptical in taking state-level startups and saying that's what's going to happen at the federal level. We have a lot of experience about that. And I, at least, am very nervous at the idea that what happens is things become much more generous real quickly. That is certainly the experience at the federal level. If it's already going on at the states, heaven help us in the creep that you might get at the federal level. So I'm nervous about that.
Right. Okay, we're going to turn over to the audience. Start. Oh, could you just wait for the mic and introduce yourself? Thank you.
Hi, I have a question. Yeah, Jane, you said...
Could you introduce yourself?
Oh, I'm Evelyn Fortier with Senate Finance. And I have a question for Jane and Harry. I mean, in a survey, I can't imagine an employer saying, no, I'm against helping people who need leave. So I'm just wondering how reliable surveys really are and, why that's being touted as a reason to do this. Have we looked at data, like Harry said, what does it show?
I think we use surveys all the time to gauge people's attitudes towards things, and so long as the survey is balanced and has opportunities for both positive and negative responses, I think we're comfortable with surveys. And it's not worded, do you think it's a good idea to help deserving people who or do you support American families? It's what's your attitude about the New Jersey's family leave law? What's your attitude about New York's family leave law? What's your attitude about Rhode Island's family leave law? And employers will vent plenty of negative opinions about laws that they don't like. I don't know what the statistics would be if you asked them about things like minimum wage increases, but I don't think you'd probably have 2/3 of them in favor of that. I think as Doug pointed out, Harry and I are talking about two different phenomena. We're talking about current employers in states with these laws and what their workforce looks like. We haven't seen any changes in workforce composition. And I'm talking also about the studies that I've done of California looking at not just people's leave taking, but also impacts on employment and earnings. And the impacts that I've found in all the research that I've done are positive. So positive impacts on employment and earnings. Harry sent a paper out a day or two ago, which I haven't had a chance to read yet, where the authors are reporting negative impacts on new hires of young, less skilled women workers. So I need to read that paper and take it, into account versus the other literature that I'm aware of. So we're talking from different data points, and so I think that's what the disagreement is.
So I did spend a lot of time. I spent almost the decade of the 1990s doing my own surveys of employers. I think the truth is, those kind of more subjective type questions, it's mixed. And what's best is if within the survey you can actually ask some more objective questions about their employment experience, their recent hires, right? And then to validate, and I think they're not worth this. Now, it might well be true that Jane says there's a small minority, 10-20% of employers that are less positive. It might be that they are driving some of the negative impacts that have been observed in this paper. It's possible, right? It's possible for a large majority of employers to say it's okay, and for that margin, if that margin's big enough to drive the negative, and that's still big enough to care about. And again, my fear is that in the red states, that margin would be wider. But so I don't want to completely denigrate what we learned from survey evidence. I'm trying to think of how you might reconcile the two of them. They might not be as opposed.
And we're on the same wavelength on that. And I just gave a talk last week, and we have been talking with my co-authors about what to do next week. And one of our next steps is to look at the 10 or 15% of employers who are not supportive of these laws and look within their data about are they the ones who reported difficulty managing leaves? Are they the ones who reported having to hire a replacement worker? Are they the ones who were reporting having fewer employees or fewer women, or and try to tease out what the negative experience is, even though it's a minority of employers. So,
and my fear is that all the evidence suggests that employers are fine with more educated professional managerial employees, long-term employees. They think it's an investment. My fear is that their skepticism will be among the least skilled or young minority folks, that they might feel fine with some employees and that might be the place that they turn away. We don't know that yet, but that's my concern.
I mean,
that's why they limit you to 30-minute lunches, 15-minute breaks. So I'm just wondering if that's being considered as you look at this.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and all of our surveys since Rhode Island, we're looking at a representative sample. We're looking at all the industries across all the sectors, and we're oversampling small firms because we really want to understand their experience.
Okay.
But I think it also relates to Aparna's point about what the composition of the workforce is currently and the new nature of jobs. And a lot of employers, you probably, you know this, in the sectors you're talking about, have a lot of part-time on-call employees. So the fact that people are going to be not there all the time is kind of built into the way they're operating already because they've got lots of on-call workers who are looking for more hours. So it's odd. We may be in a moment when it's actually easier for employers to manage having somebody out on leave because they've got all these extra workers who are looking for the hours. So I think we do have to take into account what the workforce looks like currently.
Hi, Jane Adams again from Bread for the World. I'm a policy analyst, so I'm observing and analyzing all the policy proposals that are putting out, but I'm also a 30-year-old woman that in the past year has had to take significant leave to help my elderly father. I grew up in Alabama in poverty. My dad lost his job in the recession, and he was that type of, at that certain age and at that income bracket that he never was employed again, had to pull from Social Security early, and then at 72 years old broke his hip. We've had to move him into a nursing home. And I was the primary, like most women in America, I was the primary caretaker at 29 of my father. And then thinking about wanting to have children, and at that age, I've been married for 7 years, want to have children. So I'm observing and analyzing these policies, but also recognizing that it's a joint situation for me. And for people who are having children at older ages, generally now. And I think personally from my experience, the concern about decoupling is that, it's going to be women in general that are going to have to be taking care of parents and also children, which is why I asked the gender, the question about use it or lose it earlier. But I'm looking at my own experience and going, there's going to be a lot of people in my generation who are going to have aging parents that aren't, going to be fully taken care of through Social Security, and at younger ages might have to be taking care of older parents or helping them navigate the system. So I say all that to say I'm uncomfortable about decoupling because it's both and for me, and it's oftentimes both and for women. And frankly, I was unsatisfied with Senator Cassidy's answer about how important it is for men to have these benefits too. And I say that all hairy because I think one of the concerns is employers, I agree that there might be concerns about them, not hiring women of a certain age because they've assigned this as a women's thing, right? Whereas if we incentivized men, made them pay into the system as much as or take it, that then perhaps, ideally, it would be, no, this is a family thing. Men and women take care of children, and men and women take care of their parents. So, yeah.
I would love to see that happen. I mean, I 100% support the idea that this should be gender neutral. And maybe if there's evidence that men take it, that it would then change the employer's perception and therefore their behavior about where it's going to occur.
Doug, do you want to quickly comment on the decoupling and then?
I mean, part of this is just your take on the politics. Like, if you refuse to decouple, do you end up with nothing? And so that's an empirical question. I don't know the answer to that. I'll go back to this sort of issue that I'm concerned about, which is at some level a different issue, but it bleeds into this, which is what you characterize is exactly right. We have an increasingly aged population with increasing incidence of need for assistance in daily living, and long-term care demands are absolutely an important issue. They are primarily provided by family members, in-kind contributions, largely women, and at the same time as their labor force participation rose, their parents got old, and this is something in which we have just chosen to not deal with. We had this one attempt in the ACA, the Class Act, which did not hang together financially and has been repealed. And my concern is that this will be perceived as a fix for that. This is not a fix for that. It's an entirely unsatisfying benefit from that point of view. So I'm just worried about the lack of clarity in thinking about what the caregiving is meant to accomplish.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Tiffany Day. So my question is related to family. And I think just kind of given the history of this country, some communities define family in a very unique way. My question is kind of as we get deeper into the issue and begin to take steps to better define this, what will be the implications for other federally funded programs and services? And is there a need to rethink the way that we define family, and should we allow families to define that for themselves?
Jane?
Yeah, it's a really important issue. I was testifying at a subcommittee of Ways and Means a couple of weeks ago, and one of the other women testifying was a grandmother who was having an awful lot of trouble accessing benefits that are intended for parents, and yet she was the primary caregiver for her grandchildren, one of whom had special needs. So it really brought home to me the importance of making sure that the benefits that we define are defined in a way that cover the range of family members that are actually providing care. And as I was saying, in the family leave arena, the states, if anything, are extending the definition of family to try to address that. So the most glaring issue is grandparents, but there's also issues around do you cover, what if you need to care for a sibling? What if you need to care for a partner who's not your legal spouse, but a partner? I think we really have to pay attention to it.
I have a slightly different perspective on it. I think that flexibility about family is important. There may be people for whom there is no biological relationship, but they still are the equivalent of family. What I would be concerned about is if we begin to define family so broadly that the whole policy blows up because, if you have so many family members, you could be taking caregiving leave, just about every month or certainly every year. And that's going to not work. So one of the ideas I've had about that we've discussed within our group is that you specify yourself. Here are the, pick your number, the 3 or 4 people in my life who are most important to me, and they are going to count as family, quote unquote, whatever the relationship is. It might be a grandmother, it might be a spouse, it might be a partner, it might be a best friend.
Okay, we'll do one quick question, and then we have to.
We've had a lot of talk about state laws, a little bit of talk about the employer community, but I guarantee you that the employer community would be willing to buy into a very generous paid federal leave benefit in exchange for preemption of state and local laws. Mm-hmm. And yet there's a lot of state laws on the books already, but there's a lot more coming down the pike. It's a little off topic, I guess, but do you see any chance of that happening, or do you see that? At least it should be part of the mix of some of the talk, because it really would be a great sweetener for the business community, and there's that kind of pressure to, because of the development at the state level, to move a bill at the federal level.
I have no idea if this is possible. I like the idea because part of my concern is on many dimensions, on minimum wage and other things, that absent responsible, sensible federal action, some of the very blue states just go and go and go. And I think do burden some things. So I would love to have something like that, an agreement where the federal government has built a higher floor in return to reining in a little bit some of what the states are doing. But I have no idea if politically that is remotely feasible.
You know, it's a very important question, so I'm glad you raised it. And it's a very difficult question. I think the problem is that what we're thinking about likely doing at the federal level is going to be much less generous than what many states are doing, and how our states and the people that live in them that are going to then actually be worse off feel about that. So I think for that reason, given that we have so many states that are already on board, and as Jane has said, many of which are getting more and more generous, and the most recent states that have enacted a law have gone towards more generous proposals, that is creating a real problem about how to deal with that issue.
Great. Okay, we're about out of time. Thank you so much to our panel for the excellent discussion, and thanks to all of you for being here. Please join me in thanking our panelists. Thank you.